That third feeding bag is still half full. You used it again this morning on the same 6 tomato plants. 6 weeks in, and only a handful of those plants have anything close to a flower on them. The plant taking it looks like the healthiest one on the whole property. Dark green, thick stem, leaves stacked so close together you can barely see the lower branches anymore. So it feels like it's working. More growth means more plant means more tomatoes eventually. Except count the flower clusters on that plant. 2, maybe 3, and one of those already dropped its blossoms before they did anything. Here's what's actually happening on that stem right now, today, while it still looks like your best plant. New side shoots are pushing out faster than you can prune them, sometimes 2 or 3 new growth points in a single week. The main stem keeps thickening, almost succulent, almost too thick for a tomato plant this age. And that's not the only thing changing. Up at the top, the newest leaves are curling slightly inward, not wilting, just curling, like they're trying to fold in on themselves. And those flower clusters that did form? They're going yellow right at the base, right where they attach to the stem, then dropping clean off within a day or 2. No fruit set, no pollination problem you can see. Just blossoms appearing and then quietly disappearing. You fed this plant to get fruit and instead you got more plant. Before anything else, check the bag you used this week. If nitrogen is the first number on that label and it's higher than the other 2, set it aside for now. That single move is where the fix actually starts, and the reason behind it is worth understanding before you reach for anything new. This is the part where most gardening advice tells you to check your watering schedule, or suspect a pollinator problem, or blame the heat. Sometimes those are real factors, but if you've been feeding the same fertilizer since May without changing anything, there's a good chance the plant is simply responding to exactly what it's being fed. It's still growing. The fertilizer is still working, just not toward what you put it in the ground for. Tomato plants run on 2 completely different programs, and most gardeners assume those 2 phases overlap. They don't. Early on, a transplant needs nitrogen to build leaves, stems, and root mass. That's what spring feeding is for. But once the plant starts setting flowers, it needs a different signal, one that says stop building and start producing. Heavy nitrogen at that stage actively competes with flowering for the plant's energy, because under high nitrogen, a tomato plant keeps prioritizing growth over reproduction every time. Picture a teenager who keeps getting handed protein shakes during a track meet. He'll keep bulking, sure, but he's not running the race anyone's there to watch. So the fix isn't more food. It's different food, applied differently. Stop the nitrogen-heavy fertilizer completely for the next 10 to 14 days. Let the plant come down off that growth signal before introducing anything new. After that pause, switch to a fertilizer with a much lower first number and higher second and third numbers on the label, something built for blooming and fruiting rather than leafy growth. A common ratio you'll see marketed for tomatoes at this stage is something like 3, 4, 6, or similar, low nitrogen, moderate phosphorus, higher potassium. Every couple of weeks is enough, not weekly, and when you do apply it, it needs to go deep into the soil instead of sitting on the surface. A standard mature tomato plant in open ground typically takes around 2 tablespoons of granular bloom fertilizer worked into the soil at the drip line, roughly where the outermost leaves end, rather than dumped right against the main stem. Water it in well after applying so it reaches the root zone instead of just sitting in the top inch of soil and doing nothing. If your tomatoes are in containers rather than open ground, cut that pause down to about a week instead of 2. Container soil holds far less reserve nitrogen than garden soil does, so the plant burns through the excess faster, but it also means the fix needs to start sooner once you do switch. The smaller soil volume also means concentration builds faster. Half the amount goes just as far. Once that pause is underway, the next thing that matters is what you actually put back. Phosphorus is what the plant draws on to start forming new flower sites after weeks of building leaf mass instead. It also helps push energy back into the root system, which on a plant like this is often shallower than it looks, hidden underneath all that leaf cover. Potassium is what moves sugars into the fruit once it sets, which is the difference between a tomato that ripens evenly and one that stays green-shouldered or ripens unevenly even after it's fully sized. Think of potassium as the plant's internal delivery truck, the thing that actually gets the sugar from leaf to fruit instead of leaving it stuck at the source. That green shoulder issue deserves its own mention, because a lot of growers blame it on variety or too much sun, when potassium deficiency is just as often the real driver. The fruit sizes up fine, even colors around the bottom and sides, but the area near the stem stays pale green and never fully ripens. Same visual pattern, just showing up in the fruit instead of the flower clusters. Now, a curling leaf and a dropped blossom can come from more than one cause, so it's worth knowing how to tell this apart from the other usual suspects. Heat stress above about 90 degrees Fahrenheit will drop blossoms too. But heat-dropped flowers usually fall without yellowing first, and the whole plant looks slightly wilted by afternoon even with adequate water. Poor pollination shows up differently still. Flowers that simply never open properly or never get visited, not flowers that form normally and then yellow at the base after several days. This pattern shows up most clearly in plants that have been pushed hard with the same feeding schedule for weeks, especially once watering and heat have been ruled out. There's a second tell most growers miss because they're looking at the wrong plant part. Check the stem just below where each leaf joins it, the petiole. On a plant like this, that junction often looks slightly swollen, almost rubbery, compared to a plant on a balanced feeding schedule. It's a small detail, easy to walk past, but once you see it on one plant, you start noticing it everywhere. Pair that swelling with the base yellowing on the flower clusters, and you've got about as clear a picture as a home garden ever gives you without a soil test. In lighter soil, this shift happens faster once you make the change. In heavier ground, it can take much longer before the plant reacts to the new feeding, sometimes close to the full 2 weeks even in open beds, because clay holds nitrogen far longer than it looks like it should. Once you've made the switch, don't expect results overnight. Most tomato plants take somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks to show a visible shift toward flowering once the feeding changes. The first sign usually isn't a flush of new blossoms. It's actually a slowdown in new leaf growth, the plant redirecting its energy before you see where that energy is going. During that window, resist the urge to add anything else. No extra bloom booster, no foliar spray, nothing. The plant needs that pause to be a real pause. New flower clusters tend to follow about a week after the slowdown in leaf growth becomes obvious. Determinate varieties, the bush types that set most of their fruit in a shorter window, tend to respond a little faster than indeterminate vining types, simply because they're not also juggling continuous new growth at the same time they're trying to set fruit. There's one more layer to this that catches a lot of growers off guard. Even after switching fertilizer correctly, a plant that's been overloaded for weeks has a kind of momentum built into it, side shoots already in motion, growth hormones already circulating, and that momentum doesn't stop. The moment you change what's in the watering can. That's why pruning starts to matter more than people expect at this stage. Removing some of those vigorous new side shoots, the suckers forming in the leaf joints, gives the plant one less place to send that energy and redirects more of what's left toward the flower clusters that are trying to form. Skip the pruning and you're fighting the fertilizer switch with one hand tied behind your back. Time the pruning carefully, though. Pull more than about a quarter of the foliage in a single session, and you risk scorching the fruit that's already developing, since those leaves were providing shade along with everything else. It's better to spread it across 2 or 3 sessions a few days apart, taking a little each time rather than stripping the plant down at once. The plant handles a gradual reduction far better than a single hard cut, especially when it's already under the kind of stress this feeding schedule creates. By the time you're 2 to 3 weeks into the new schedule, the plant that looked like your healthiest tomato for all the wrong reasons should start looking like your most productive one for the right ones. Slightly slower top growth. More flower clusters holding instead of dropping. The kind of plant that's quietly turning sugar into fruit instead of fertilizer into more leaves. Go check your fertilizer bag right now, the one you use this week. If the first number on that label is higher than the second and third, that's not a feeding schedule anymore. That's the reason behind everything you just read. Switch it before your next feeding, not after. Tell me in the comments how many flower clusters you're seeing right now. Whether they're dropping at the base, because if your garden looks like what I just described, the next video on this channel covers the mistake that usually follows this one.